Non-Monogamy Help is a podcast where your questions about open, non-monogamous or polyamorous relationships are answered. Our host, Lola Phoenix, will consult a licensed therapist with over a decade of experience to address your problems. Names and locations have been changed or censored to keep your questions anonymous. You're listening to Non-Monogamy Help, the podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 31 of Non-Monogamy Help. I'm Lola Phoenix. Please send your questions to nonmonogamyhelp@gmail.com and they'll either be in the podcast or the column anonymously. You can choose which one of you are so inclined. If you want to read the columns and listen to the podcast, you can go to nonmonogamyhelp.com, subscribe to our newsletter by going to go.nonmonogamyhelp.com/email, and follow us on Twitter at nonmonogamyhelp. If you would like to support the columns and the podcast, please consider becoming a patron. Even just $1 a month can help support the daily running of the columns and podcasts, and it just shows that you like what it is that I'm doing. And you can do that by going to patreon.com/Lola Phoenix. If you donate $5 or more a month, your name, with your permission, will be read at the end of the podcast. Let's get to this week's discussion question. If this is the first time you're hearing this, every week before I read the letter, I put forth a discussion question that you can use with your friends, partners, mentors, anyone that you want to get to know a little bit more. I also answer it myself briefly to give you a little bit of context. This week's discussion question is: if you were to die this evening with no opportunity to communicate with anyone, what would you most regret not having told someone? Why haven't you told them yet? So people might think this question is a little bit morbid. I really like questions like this because if you don't know what death positivity is, you should really look it up. It's basically a movement that is all about breaking down the taboos that society has around discussing death and encouraging people to actually make their wishes known and all that kind. I'm not really doing a good job of summarizing it, but that's what it's about. So I always think about these kinds of things, like, because we have a limited amount of time. And as I'm releasing this episode, we are, in a global pandemic, and people may not want to think about this kind of stuff, but I do think it's important to always think about this kind of stuff. For me personally, I don't think that there is anything that I have to say that I haven't already said. There might be like a few things that I feel like I want to re-emphasize at certain points. Sometimes when I'm angry, I want to find people who I think in particular have really, really deeply affected me, and because I don't know if they know how badly they affected me, and just say, I just want you to know that, yeah, you did this thing. But, why don't I do that now is because I don't think anything fruitful can come from it. So I'm not that interested in trying to have discussions with people who I don't think are going to be receptive to my message if what I really, really want is for them to listen to me. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. So that's an interesting topic, especially even in these very difficult times for you to put forward to your partners, lovers, or anyone else you want to get to know. I'll repeat it again just so you have it. The discussion question is: if you were to die this evening with no opportunity to communicate with anyone, what would you most regret not having told someone? Why haven't you told them yet? Alright, let's get to this week's letter. I, 27 female, am a lesbian with limited dating experience due to being partially closeted and anxious about it until this year. I recently started dating a bisexual woman with considerably more sexual experience who I met online. The last few months have been dreamy, domestic, and tense, and erotic. When we started hooking up, I knew she was non-monogamous, but I was unconcerned, other than discussing the usual safety stuff. Our relationship quickly grew more emotionally deep, and we are compatible in ways that I never knew I could be. We are on the same page that we feel we want to make a long-term commitment happen, and with the full knowledge that I am queer and requited love for the first time, and probably still in some sort of honeymoon phase, I think I want to keep this woman. That being said, the one persistent issue we've been having is regarding the open or closed status of our relationship. I've been trying to warm to the idea of being open, because I know that she is a sexual person and variety is really important for her well-being. I also recognize that my initial discomfort with the idea could have been due to my unfamiliarity with polydynamics. We've talked about it extensively and set up boundaries that would mean we are each other's primaries, and casual dating and hooking up with others would be allowed, although neither of us has taken advantage of this yet. I am unsure if I even want to do so, although I am curious what sleeping with other women might be like. I know she definitely has been testing the waters, but has refrained from meeting anyone yet, so as not to hurt me. I realized I couldn't abide by our agreed terms recently when she was testing the waters again and telling me about flirting and being interested in hooking up with someone. I felt my stomach curl in on itself and betrayal fill me, even though I knew she was fine by our terms. We had a long talk and are currently considering 2 options that we would try out as trial runs before sitting down and having that real heart-crushing talk about whether we need to part ways. The first, her idea, is that she would try out monogamy with me, super communicating to make sure resentment wasn't building and adjusting accordingly. The second, my idea, was that I'd let go and let her pursue whoever with the request that she tell me no other details than the bare bones for health purposes and to make sure she's happy. I know that I would not be able to handle if I made her persistently unhappy, and know she currently feels guilty because that's part of how I've been feeling this whole time. I have to hope that by normalizing it to myself, working through my hang-ups, and giving my unconscious time to settle into the idea that she is here to stay and is proving that by staying, I can begin to let go and let her do what makes her happy, while also being happy and secure in myself and what we have. Am I missing something? How can I make myself, and therefore her, more comfortable here? Are there any reading resources? I am aware enough to know that there's only so long we can carry on like this, and I am determined to put my best effort to figure this out before either of us gets hurt any more than we need to. My heart has already been working through some rough truths, and to me she is worth every scuff. Please give me some hope or guidance here. So I have to say, there's barely anything for me to say here. Because, honestly, I think you have nailed it. I don't think it's a good idea for her to try monogamy. It seems like she's pretty well versed in the fact that polyamory is, or at least an open relationship is what she wants. And I think that your suggestion makes a hell of a lot of sense. It might be that over time you're more comfortable hearing some details, or just kind of more than the bare bones. But I think in the meantime, that actually works really, really well. She and you both need to stop avoiding things, though. She's avoiding going out with other people to avoid hurting you, and that's totally understandable, and I'm not saying that's wrong, but eventually, basically, the more you avoid that kind of thing, the worse and worse the build-up gets, and the more and more anxiety sets in, and the more and more discomfort you feel. So she has to stop avoiding meeting people because she's afraid it might hurt you. She kind of has to accept the fact that you may have to experience polyamory before you really, really know if it's not for you or not. Unfortunately, that's kind of how it has to be. And there's no real easy way to do that. And most of the time when people try to find easy ways into polyamory, it just tends to be more avoidance. So I do think that your option makes the most sense. You're going to feel uncomfortable, though. You ask, how can I make myself more comfortable? You're going to feel uncomfortable. That's just that. This is a completely new relationship for you, actually. It's new ground because it's actually the first kind of real deep relationship it seems like you've had. And you're trying out an open relationship, you're going to be uncomfortable. You're just gonna. The problem is that the discomfort that you probably felt in having this first requited, you probably felt some discomfort when you started off in this relationship, or some fear. But you expected that to a certain extent, or that was seen as culturally appropriate. But the problem is that you've been living in a society that tells you that love, part of love is exclusivity. Part of love is someone only wanting to date or have sex with you. And so you're fighting against this messaging you've been giving your whole life, so you're going to feel even more uncomfortable. And I think you can kind of appreciate, as a queer woman, you talk about how you've been partially closeted. So you know what it feels like to kind of be afraid because you've had society telling you something is wrong, wrong, wrong. So you know what that feels like. And this is, in a way, not exactly identical, but it is similar to that. You don't have any models for this. You don't have any guidance in it. So you are going to feel a little lost and a little scared. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. It doesn't mean that this isn't necessarily for you. And the good thing here is that, you've already decided what you're going to get out of this. I think it's really great that you've talked about the kind of relationship structure that you want. I think it's worth considering, it doesn't sound like you've set up any rules of I won't fall in love with anyone. It doesn't sound like you've set up rules that have to do with things you can't control. You've decided, okay, we're going to be each other's primaries. This is what that means. Casual dating and hooking up is something that is allowed, and, it seems like you're communicating enough to where if things seem to be getting more serious with someone else, you'd have a talk about that and you kind of explore that. So, you've already decided what kind of relationship structure you want. It seems like you've decided the physical aspects of that. It seems like you're talking about safety, which is really, really great. It seems like as well you're thinking about what you can get out of polyamory. So even though you're kind of you were kind of not keen on the idea at first, now you're sort of realizing, okay, maybe it might be interesting to date other people. You can see where you can go with that. So honestly, you've done pretty much all you can. You're in an excellent position. Like, even though it may not feel like that right now because you are really nervous and really uncomfortable, this is just a necessary part of the process. Like, you're gonna feel uncomfortable when you're trying something new. You're both, you have this really strong connection. You're really, really afraid to hurt one another. You're really, really afraid of losing one another. But what I see that's really awesome about this is that, you both are understanding that there is a potential that you might be incompatible, and you're not hiding that from one another. You're very, very honest about that. You're like, we may have to have that heartbreaking conversation about whether we need to part ways, but you're trying really hard to make sure that you're doing the best you can to figure things out before you hurt one another. And hopefully it seems like your girlfriend is also committed to doing that. And I honestly think that's the best thing you can do. Like, you're both, if your girlfriend is approaching this as emotionally aware as you are, then you're both in a really, really great place. There won't be anything you can do to prevent complete incompatibility, but you've got pretty much everything going here. So yeah, I would say, like, I don't advise that she try monogamy. I just feel like, if she's had a lot of experience, and you don't say whether or not she's tried monogamy before, but if she's had a lot of experience, then she, unless she's kind of a bit older and is feeling like, I don't really feel like dating very much anymore, it'd be one thing if she had all this experience and was kind of reaching a point in her life where she wasn't that interested in going out and doing anything with anyone anymore. It would be one thing for her to try monogamy, but that just doesn't seem like where she is right now. And I don't think it's really good for her to deny that aspect of herself, because even though, it's kind of, resentment is kind of a hard thing to figure out, like, when is it coming up, because it's a kind of thing that builds slowly, and I just don't know if even with constant communication you're going to necessarily be able to prevent that. It's just going to lead to a bit of unhappiness, and I think it's probably more likely that you might be, because you do have some interest in seeing other people, and because you also don't necessarily have a lot of experience yourself, a lot of people end up being interested in polyamory down the line because they don't have a lot of experience, and because they, didn't really think about marriage and kind of, sexual monogamy for the rest of their life. They kind of go, oh, wait, I don't know if that's really something that, I want to do in my life. So it makes a lot more sense from your end for you to be potentially interested in sleeping with other people in the future. Maybe you won't be that keen on it right this minute, and maybe you might be the kind of person like me where, I don't find partners very frequently because that's just not how things go for me, and that's fine. But either way, you're approaching this honestly, like, in one of the best ways that you can. If you have access to therapy, I definitely think you should still try and see a polyamory friendly couples therapist that can kind of help you talk about things. That therapist may feel like the bare bones kind of, because you're not asking for a don't ask, don't tell. You're not basically asking her to lie. And I think you just want to know the basics of things for health purposes, and just to know that she's happy and that she's okay. And I think that's fair enough. And you might find that as you said it perfectly, like, you just have to settle into the idea, see that she's here to stay, and have her prove that by staying, and then you'll begin to feel a lot less anxious. I think that's really, really true. And I think as you become more comfortable with her, you establish a foundation together, you probably will find that you're okay with hearing a little bit more. It's okay if you don't want to know the intimate details. I don't want to know the intimate details. I'm not interested in that. It doesn't, some people are really interested in that. Either way is fine. But you might feel later down the line that you're a little bit more settled and you feel a little bit more established with her, and it doesn't feel quite as scary to hear that stuff. That description of you say your stomach curling in on yourself and having all those emotions, that's totally normal. And I think if you read anything or you understand anything, make sure you avoid anything that makes you feel like there's something wrong with you for having a bad feeling, or that having any kind of negative reaction to your partner dating or seeing someone else means that you're not polyamorous, because it's completely understandable for you to have these feelings. I feel like, with being a queer woman and knowing what it's like to be closeted, like, what it's like to be influenced by a culture that's around you and to feel really bad. I can't speak for you, but I know that I've heard from a lot of people where the first queer feelings that they had were coupled with a lot of shame and a lot of guilt and a lot of negative feelings. And again, I'm not saying be queer is the same thing as being polyamorous, because I don't feel that that's the same. But what I'm saying is that if you can kind of look to that experience, if you did experience something like that, and kind of understand that these reactions and feelings you're having partially are fear, understandable fear, because you're with this new person and you haven't really established your foundation yet and you're scared, and that's understandable, but also partly because you live in a society that's told you your whole life that exclusivity means that someone loves you. So it's hard for you to just, turn overnight and magically believe the opposite. So, yeah, to sum it up, I think that you're in a really, really good place, and I think your idea sounds the best. And I think you should see if you can get a polyamory-friendly couples therapist to kind of help you walk through stuff. She needs to stop avoiding this. You're going to have to bite the bullet and go with it at some point. You can't avoid hurting someone. Unfortunately, that's just how things happen. It's totally understandable. I'm not saying that she's in any way, being bad or whatever. But you gotta jump in at some point. And just expect that you'll feel uncomfortable. Learn how to cope with that. Realize that being uncomfortable doesn't make you a bad person. It's just part of the experience. There's also a good book called Rewriting the Rules by Meg John Barker. I would definitely recommend that one. And yeah, in general, just kind of go with it and trust that you've done the work. You've set the foundation. You've decided what kind of relationship you want. You see the benefits you can get out of it, and just try to learn how to cope with that anxiety, and eventually that anxiety will get better. Like, in my experience, it does. And you may unfortunately find out that polyamory isn't for you, and that's also okay too. And it really does sound like if you do figure that out, like, you both seem communicative enough where it doesn't have to be this horrible, life-altering, cataclysmic, sad thing. It sounds like you could part in a fairly amicable way. So try to as well keep that in mind. All right? I hope that helps, and good luck. Thank you for listening to episode 31 of Non-Monogamy Help. If you want to be awesome, you can donate to our Patreon. Donating $5 or more a month means that your name, with your permission, will be read at the end of the podcast. This week's current patrons are Laura Boylan, Chris Albury-Jones Duke, and James Wartell. If you haven't heard your name read aloud and you just recently gave, then please send me a message, and I should be able to get you in next after next week's episode. If for whatever reason you can't become a patron because life happens and there's also a stressful situation happening, if you can take 5 minutes and log into iTunes, find the podcast, and rate and review it, that would also be really, really helpful. It helps us get the podcast out there to new people. If you don't want to write a review, you don't have to. You can just do a rating, and that's also appreciated. So yeah, if you've got 5 minutes and it's a holiday, so why not? Please do that if you can. That's all for this week. You'll get a new column next Friday and another podcast episode in a fortnight. And just in case you missed it, last week, I didn't release a podcast. I think it was before last week I didn't release a podcast, but I did release a new article instead. I wrote an article that is specifically for people who are just starting out in non-monogamy and are looking for kind of like a 101 guide a little bit, and it's called 13 Mistakes that people make when trying polyamory. And yeah, basically I find myself giving the same kind of advice over and over again in the column and the podcast sometimes and in the communities I'm in. So I tried to take everything down into one place, the most frequent things that I saw people doing, and put it in one place so that people who are just starting out can read it and wrap their head around some stuff. So yeah, please check that out. That is on my Medium website. I don't think you can get to it by going to nonmonogamyhelp.com, but you can go to my Medium profile, which I believe is, let me double check, medium.com/ at the Lola Phoenix, and you should be able to find 13 mistakes people make when trying polyamory. So give that a read and recommend that to folks if they're looking for a beginner kind of article to check out. Alright, thanks so much. Bye.
You've been listening to Non-Monogamy Help. Our podcast music has been provided by Chris Albury-Jones at albury-jones.com, and the art was made by Dom Jung at domduong.com. Thank you for listening.